The inventory was 11 pages long. It listed the manor house with its 16 rooms, the north-facing library with its water-damaged ceiling, 340 acres of farmland, 1 lake, 2 fishing streams, and a stable of 6 horses, one of which had an unfortunate opinion about new people and expressed it with her teeth. It listed the furniture, the plate, the linens, the wine cellar, respectably stocked, for once, unlike most estates of its kind, and the debts, considerable debts, piled like stones over 30 years by a man who had preferred beauty to prudence and had never once apologized for it. And then, at the bottom of the final page, written in a hand smaller and more careful than the rest, as though whoever had added it had been uncertain whether it belonged there at all, was one last entry. One young woman, currently residing in the north rooms, age 23, status ward, no instructions have been provided for her relocation. Oliver Greymont, the new Duke of Crestmoor, read the line twice. Then he looked up at his solicitor, Mr. Crail, who was examining the ceiling with sudden and intense interest. "Ward," Oliver said. "Yes, Your Grace. And yet no one saw fit to mention this when I purchased the property." Mr. Crail cleared his throat. "It was believed, Your Grace, that the matter would resolve itself." Oliver set down the inventory. He had purchased a manor. He had purchased land, livestock, and a debt structure that would require 3 years of careful management to untangle. He had not purchased a ward. But apparently, she had come with the floors. The carriage reached Crestmoor on a Thursday, in the kind of November rain that doesn't so much fall as hang in the air and wait for you. Oliver stepped out first and stood for a moment looking at the house. It was older than he had imagined, the stonework darkened by weather, the east-facing windows catching no light worth speaking of. The drive was bordered by old ash trees that had been there long enough to stop caring what anyone thought. He was 31 years old. He was broad-shouldered and methodical, and had spent 5 years in the Navy learning that most problems are solved not by force but by patience and the correct application of information. He had returned to England with neither ambition nor enthusiasm, purchased Crestmoor because it was remote and the price reflected his solicitor's concern rather than his own, and come here now because London had begun to feel like a coat belonging to someone else. He wanted quiet. He wanted work that mattered. He wanted, if he was being honest with himself, to stop being looked at. The housekeeper, Mrs. Vickers, met him at the door. She was a compact woman of perhaps 60, with the expression of someone who has outlasted several catastrophes and does not expect the current one to be the last. Behind her stood the small staff in their line, a footman, a kitchen maid, the cook, an elderly groundskeeper who appeared to be conducting his own internal meeting. And at the end of the line, half a step behind the others, stood a young woman. She was not wearing staff uniform. Everyone else wore the dark, practical clothing of household service. She wore a gray dress, plain but well made, cut in a way that did not belong to the servants' hall. Her dark hair was pinned back with the particular severity of someone who is trying to take up less space than she naturally would. Her hands were folded in front of her. She was looking at the gravel. Oliver noted it and said nothing. Aurelia Dunstable had been standing in that line for 40 minutes. She had stood very still, which was something she had learned to do early and well, still and quiet and useful. Those were the qualities that kept her in this house when everything else about her presence was technically indefensible. She had no legal right to be here. She had no formal arrangement. She had nothing at all, really, except 23 years of knowing where every floorboard creaked and every window stuck and every letter her father had locked in the desk he was now no longer alive to unlock. She looked at the gravel and listened to the new Duke's footsteps as he walked past. She thought, He notices things. He walked the length of the line, and his eyes moved like a man counting. She thought, he noticed me. She did not look up. The first week proceeded in the careful fashion of two people trying to assess each other, without appearing to do so. Oliver found her useful. This was the first thing he catalogued after the obvious things. She was in the kitchen before the cook arrived each morning. She knew which chimney in the north wing backed up in wet weather and why. She had apparently written a 16-page condition report on the library water damage the previous spring and left it on the desk of a man who had read it, thanked her, and done nothing, because he was a man who had always preferred to understand a problem fully before deciding to ignore it. "What is her role here?" Oliver asked Mrs. Vickers on the third day. Mrs. Vickers looked at him with the careful neutrality of a woman who has been asked a question she has been dreading. "She assists where she's needed, Your Grace." That is a description of a general servant. "Yes, Your Grace." "She is not dressed as a general servant." Mrs. Vickers said nothing, which was, Oliver was beginning to understand, her way of saying a great deal. He found her. He did not yet use her name freely. No one had offered it without hesitation. In the library on the fourth afternoon, reorganizing the shelves with a system that made immediate sense to him in the way that all genuinely logical systems do. She did not look up when he entered. "You," he said. She looked up then. Her eyes were a deep, unusual brown, the kind that in certain light looked almost amber. They were steady. They did not perform. "Your Grace." "What is your name?" A pause, brief, controlled, almost invisible. "Aurelia, Your Grace." "Aurelia what?" "Dunstable," she said, and then, after a small pause that he would think about much later, "for now." He did not ask what she meant by that. He should have. He filed it and moved on. Mr. Crail arrived on the sixth day for a working dinner and said, over a competent roast that the cook produced with more confidence than Oliver had expected, the closest thing to an explanation he had yet received. "She has simply always been here," Crail said, selecting his words with the precision of a man choosing which truths to offer and which to fold quietly into his napkin. "The late Duke left no instructions, no funds set aside. She is, in the legal sense, not precisely anything." "Not precisely anything," Oliver repeated. "It is not, I confess, a satisfying description." "No." Oliver set down his fork. "What was her relationship to the late Duke?" Crail looked at the candle. He looked at the table. He looked at the particular middle distance that men look at when they have been paid to keep a secret and are beginning to regret the arrangement. "Ward," he said finally, "as the inventory states." Oliver looked at him. Crail was an organized man, reliable over many years of professional acquaintance. He was also, Oliver now observed for the first time, a genuinely poor liar. "Of course," Oliver said pleasantly, and changed the subject. He watched her after that. Carefully, without making it obvious. In the manner of a man who spent 5 years learning that the sea will tell you everything you need to know if you stop trying to force the conversation. He noticed that she spoke to the kitchen maid in French. Not textbook French. Comfortable French. The French of someone who learned it young, in a setting where it was simply expected. He noticed that the groundskeeper, old Mr. Paris, removed his hat when she passed, in the instinctive way of a man, deferring to someone his body remembers as an authority, even if his mind has been told to forget it. He noticed that she moved through Crestmoor with a particular kind of familiarity. Servants know a house because they have worked in every corner of it. Aurelia moved through Crestmoor the way you move through a place you knew before you knew anything. Not learned familiarity. Older than that. The house and she had the quality of two things that had grown up alongside each other. He noticed her standing, one gray afternoon, in the doorway of what Mrs. Vickers told him had been the late Duke's private study, which had been closed since his death and smelled of old paper and pipe smoke. She stood with one hand on the doorframe and did not go in. Her expression was the expression of someone who is not sure they are allowed to grieve. He noticed, most damningly, that when the name Neville Ashgrove came up at dinner, the late Duke's second cousin, who had already written 3 times about the estate, Aurelia's hands went entirely still on the water jug she was holding. Just for a moment. Just long enough. The portrait was in the main hall. Oliver had walked past it a dozen times without stopping, in the preoccupied way of a man who has not yet decided whether a house truly belongs to him. He stopped in front of it on the 9th night at 10:30 because he could not sleep and had come down intending to find something, and found himself here instead. The late Duke was painted in his 50s, a large man, dark-haired, with the satisfied expression of someone who has never seriously doubted his place in the world. Beside him, seated, was a woman Oliver did not recognize, fair-haired, with the careful stillness of a portrait subject, and between them, standing slightly ahead of both her parents in the unconscious way of children, who have not yet learned to make themselves smaller, was a little girl. Dark hair, steady brown eyes, even in paint, hands folded precisely in front of her. Oliver stood there for quite a long time. Then he went upstairs and retrieved the correspondence box that Crail had handed him on arrival. Just routine household matters, Your Grace, nothing of significance, and began to read. He found what he was looking for near the bottom, on the 2nd hour. Not a letter, a journal, small, worn, its leather cover creased with use, tucked inside a sealed envelope addressed in the late Duke's own hand to the new owner of Crestmoor Hall. Oliver broke the seal. The Duke had written in the disorganized, honest way of a man who is dying and has decided that precision matters less now than truth. Her name is Aurelia Dunstable. I gave her that name to keep her safe. Her real name is Aurelia Dunstable Fenwick, and she is my daughter, and I failed her. That is the only honest way to begin this. Her mother was a woman of good family but no title, a solicitor's daughter, educated and principled, and I loved her in the way that men of my position are not supposed to love women of hers. We could not marry. My family would not permit it. I permitted them to forbid me, because I was weak and because I told myself there would be time later to make it right. There was not. Her mother died when Aurelia was 4. I brought the child here. I told everyone she was the orphaned daughter of a distant relation. I gave her a false name and a half-life and an education fit for a duke's daughter, and I told her every year that I would make it right. Every year I did not. Ashgrove threatened to expose her. He found out, I don't know how, and he threatened to take it to court, to have her publicly declared illegitimate, to ruin any chance she had of being recognized if I moved to name her in my will. He wants Crestmoor. He has always wanted it. I was dying. I was afraid. I made the worst decision of my life. I let him win. I am asking you, a stranger, a man I have never met, to do what I could not. There is a woman who has managed this estate in practice for 6 years. She deserves to manage it in fact. Her documentation is with my oldest servant, Samuel Oakes. He left 8 months ago, when Ashgrove began making inquiries. He has everything, the birth record, the baptismal certificate, the will I executed before Ashgrove found out. He is waiting. I cannot sign this. My hand will not hold steady. But I am asking you, and I am hoping that the kind of man who reads someone else's correspondence carefully is the kind of man who does something about what he finds. Oliver set the journal down on the late Duke's desk. He sat with it for a long time. The fire had burned low. Outside, the November rain had stopped, and the grounds of Crestmoor were entirely quiet. Then he went to find Aurelia. She was in the kitchen. He had known, somehow, without knowing precisely how, that she would be. She was sitting at the table, with her hands flat on the wood, and her face turned toward the dying fire, and she had the expression of someone who has been waiting for something for a very long time, and is no longer certain whether they want it to arrive. Oliver set the journal on the table in front of her. She looked at it. She looked at her father's handwriting on the cover, the particular formal script of a man she had known since, before she could hold a pen, and something moved across her face that she did not quite manage to contain. "I found it," Oliver said, "all of it." The silence between them was the particular silence of a room in which something has shifted, and neither person has yet found words for what it is. "How long," he said quietly, "have you lived in this house?" She looked at him. Her eyes, in the firelight, were very steady, not performing composure, actually composed, in the way of someone who has learned the hard way that composure is the only thing that cannot be taken from you. "Since I was 4 years old," she said. She stood. She walked to the door, and then she stopped with her back to him and said very quietly, "He told me he would fix it. Every year he told me. I stopped believing him somewhere around year 15, a pause. But he tried, in the end. He did try." She left. Oliver sat down in the chair she had vacated and remained there for a long time, in the kitchen of a house that was beginning, slowly, to tell him everything it had been keeping. He sent a letter to Samuel Oakes in the morning, to the address written in the back of the journal. He did not tell Crail. He had begun to suspect, in the careful way of a man assembling evidence rather than conclusions, that Crail's discretion had been quietly purchased some years ago by a man who could no longer pay his own bills. He filed that concern and addressed what he could control. What he could control at the moment: the journal, the address, 4 days before Neville Ashgrove arrived. Ashgrove's letter came on the Tuesday. It was not polite. He wished to clarify that any person residing informally on the estate had no legal claim upon it, and that as the late Duke's nearest surviving male relation, he retained the right to challenge any arrangements that had not been properly documented. He would be calling on Friday. Oliver read the letter standing up. Then he wrote 2 of his own. The first to Samuel Oakes: "Come as soon as you are able. Bring everything." The second to his mother, Lady Greymont, in Edinburgh: "I need your assistance. Please come at once." He told Aurelia that evening. She received the news the way she received everything, without flinching, without collapsing. She simply listened, and when he finished, she said, "He's been anticipating this for 2 years. I know. He wants whatever documents exist destroyed before anyone can act on them. I know. We have 4 days. We do." She looked at him for a moment, the careful, measuring look he had come to recognize. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, not with suspicion, with genuine curiosity, the kind that comes from a person who has learned not to assume the answer to that particular question. He considered it seriously, because it deserved seriousness. "Because your father asked me to," he said, "and because what was done to you was wrong. And because," he stopped, looked at the fire, "because I have been in this house for 2 weeks, and in that time I have watched you prevent 3 separate crises, reorganize the library, translate a French deed of sale from 1782, and argue an elderly groundskeeper out of a genuinely terrible decision regarding the south fence. And it seems to me that a woman with those particular qualities ought to at least be permitted to use her real name." The silence stretched between them. "That," she said at last, "is a very practical reason. I am a very practical man." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, the memory of one, retrieved from wherever she had put it for safekeeping. "My real name," she said quietly, "is Aurelia Dunstable Fenwick." "I know," he said. "How do you do?" Samuel Oakes arrived on Thursday morning. He was 71 years old, with the deliberate movements of a man who has been carrying something important for a very long time and fully intends to deliver it intact. He arrived by coach carrying a document case under his arm, and when Aurelia met him at the door, he looked at her with the expression of a man who has kept a very long promise and has finally been permitted to complete it. "Miss Fenwick," he said. His voice was rough with travel and with feeling. Aurelia's composure held, just barely. "Samuel," she said, "thank you for waiting." He set the document case on the library table. He unlocked it with a small key from his waistcoat pocket. He removed a sealed envelope and placed it in her hands. Then he removed, one by one, a birth record, a baptismal certificate, and a will, properly signed and witnessed and notarized 6 years before the Duke's death. "All in order," he said, "all of it." Neville Ashgrove arrived at 11 on Friday morning. He was a large man with the particular confidence of someone who has never once been asked to leave a room he wished to occupy. He arrived with 2 solicitors and a personal secretary and the expression of a man who has already written the ending of a story that does not yet belong to him. Lady Greymont had arrived the evening before from Edinburgh without announcement, in the manner of a woman who considers announcements a courtesy she has not generally found necessary. She was 63, impeccably dressed, and had the quality of attention of someone who has spent 4 decades reading rooms and the people in them. She had met Aurelia at dinner and said nothing of particular note, but she had watched her for the length of the meal, with the focused consideration of a woman conducting an internal assessment of very great significance. Oliver received Ashgrove in the drawing room, alone. He let him speak for several minutes, about wards, about legal responsibility, about the particular importance of proper documentation in matters of estate succession, and then he stood up and opened the door. Aurelia walked in. She was not wearing gray. She wore a deep blue dress he had not seen before, her hair arranged with simple precision, her back straight, her hands not folded, at her sides, open and entirely steady. She looked like the little girl in the portrait, 20 years on. She looked like no one's ward. She looked like no one's dependent. She looked like exactly who she was. "Mr. Ashgrove," she said, her voice was perfectly level, "I believe you know who I am." Ashgrove's expression held, but the quality of his stillness changed. "I know who you claim to be," he said. "Claims are not documentation." "No," Aurelia agreed, "they are not." Samuel Oakes walked in behind her. He set the document case on the table. He unlocked it. He laid each document down with the unhurried precision of a man who has been waiting years to do this and is not going to rush now. "Birth record," he said, "baptismal certificate, a will signed and notarized in the presence of 2 independent witnesses 6 years before the late Duke's death." And he reached once more into the case, a statutory declaration signed by myself attesting to the circumstances under which each document was prepared and preserved. He looked at Ashgrove with the uncomplicated calm of a man who has absolutely nothing left to fear. "She is Aurelia Margaret Dunstable Fenwick," he said, "daughter of the late Duke of Crestmoor. That has always been true. Today it is simply also provable." The room was very quiet. Ashgrove looked at the documents. He looked at his solicitors. His solicitors looked at the documents with the expressions of men who would be having a very difficult conversation in the carriage on the way home. He left at 12:30. He said very little on his way out. His solicitors said less. Oliver stood at the window and watched the carriage disappear behind the ash trees at the end of the drive. Behind him, Aurelia was sitting in the chair by the fire, not perched at the edge of it as she had always been before, as though apologizing for taking up space. Sitting in it fully, her hands in her lap. "It's done," Oliver said. "The first part," she said. He turned from the window. She was looking at him now, and there was a question in her eyes that she was not yet asking. He crossed the room and sat down across from her in the other chair, the ordinary, unremarkable configuration of two people who have just survived something together and are working out what comes next. "The will," he said. "You haven't opened it." "I know what it says." She looked at the fire, half the unentailed property, half of Crestmoor, a pause, half of what you purchased. Oliver absorbed this. He looked at the woman across from him, who had managed this house for 6 years, without a name, who had stood in doorways she was not allowed to enter, who had outlasted everything that had been done to make her invisible. "You could contest it," she said. "Many men would." "Yes," he agreed, "many would." "Are you going to?" The question was careful. The question of someone who has learned not to assume the answer. He looked at the fire. He looked at the window, where the ash trees were doing their patient, century-long work outside. He looked at the woman across from him, who had been in this house since she was 4 years old, and had never once been simply permitted to be here. "No," he said, "it's your house." She looked at him for a long moment. The thorough, searching look that he had come to understand was Aurelia's version of trust extended carefully. Whatever she found, it appeared to satisfy her. "Half," she said. "Half," he agreed. And in the pause that followed, in the warmth of the fire and the quiet of a house that was finally, legally, also hers, something shifted between them that was too new to name and too certain to ignore. His mother stayed 3 weeks. She played chess with Aurelia every evening after dinner, lost twice, won once, and declared the arrangement satisfactory. She did not comment on the changed informality of mealtimes, or the fact that Oliver had stopped saying the word and started saying Aurelia within approximately 48 hours of the documents being laid on the table. She was not, Oliver had long known, a subtle woman. She was, however, a wise one. Ashgrove attempted a formal challenge in January. His solicitors, upon reviewing the documentation with the seriousness that comes from knowing they would lose, wrote in February to say they had re-examined the matter and found no grounds to proceed. Aurelia Margaret Dunstable Fenwick was formally recognized as the daughter of the late Duke of Crestmoor in March, in a proceeding that was quiet, thorough, and conclusive. On a Saturday morning in April, in the small stone church at the edge of the Crestmoor grounds, with Samuel Oakes and Mrs. Vickers as witnesses and Lady Greymont in the front pew, looking ferociously pleased, Oliver Greymont and Aurelia Dunstable Fenwick were married. It was raining. It rained frequently in that part of the country, which Aurelia had always found deeply sensible of it. Spring came to Crestmoor the way it always had, without asking permission. The ash trees along the drive came into leaf. The lake caught the afternoon light differently in May. The north-facing library which Oliver had spent the winter re-roofing, with the focused determination of a man who has decided that water damage is a personal affront, was dry for the first time in a decade. Aurelia had found the original architectural drawings in the estate archive and produced them one evening at the kitchen table, unrolled across the flour-dusted surface, tracing the original drainage specifications with her finger, while the contractor looked on with the expression of a man who has been defeated by primary sources. Oliver had looked at her across the table in the particular way he looked at her, when words were not the correct instrument. She had noticed. She was learning to read him the way she had always read this house, through accumulated attention, through the small and consistent things. He did not perform. He did not say things he did not mean. When he looked at her in a certain way, it meant precisely what it appeared to mean, without condition or qualification. She had spent 23 years in a house where nothing meant what it appeared to mean. She found the directness, quietly and entirely, the most restoring thing she had ever known. In June, she found the original inventory in the estate records, filed between two seasonal accounts and a letter about the drainage in the lower field. She read through all 11 pages, the manor house, the farmland, the lake, the horses, the wine cellar, the furniture, the debts. And then, at the bottom of the final page, in handwriting smaller and more careful than the rest, one young woman, currently residing in the north rooms. Age, 3 and 20. Status, ward. No instructions have been provided for her relocation. She sat with it for a long moment. Then she took her pen, and in her own clear and unhurried hand, she drew a single line through the last entry. In the margin beside it, she wrote 4 words. Oliver looked up from the ledger he was reviewing across the desk. Their desk now, covered in estate correspondence and household accounts, and one of Lady Greymont's unsolved chess problems left behind with the implicit expectation that someone would attend to it. "What are you doing?" "Correcting an error," she said. He came around the desk and looked over her shoulder at what she had written. In the margin of the inventory, beside the crossed-out entry, in Aurelia's precise and steady hand. "Her name is Aurelia." He was quiet for a moment. Then he put his hand over hers on the page, briefly, simply, the gesture of a man who knows when words are beside the point. "Yes," he said, "it is." The inventory was refiled in the estate records, where it remained. The house stood, as it had always stood, at the end of the long drive behind the ash trees, which had been there far longer than anyone had tried to own them. The north library was dry. The late Duke's private study had been opened, aired, and returned to use. On the wall beside the window hung a small painting, a young woman sitting in a garden chair, reading, unaware that she was being observed. On the back, in the late Duke's handwriting, A. In the garden. Summer. Samuel Oakes had brought it with the documents and said only, he looked at it every day. He said he wanted to remember you as you were when you didn't know you were being seen. He said that was when you were most yourself. Aurelia had asked for it to be hung where the morning light came in. On the mantelpiece in the study, beside the painting, stood a small framed card on which someone had written, in careful and unhurried letters, "Aurelia, Margaret Dunstable Fenwick, daughter of this house, home." Outside, the ash trees did their patient, centuries-long work of simply remaining. And in the library, with the window open and the June light falling through it, and the sound of the house easy and familiar around her, her house, her name, her life, finally and completely and irrevocably hers, Aurelia Dunstable Fenwick turned a page and read, "Thank you for listening all the way to the end. We'd love to know where you're watching from and what this story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story from June Stories."